bringing us to section E, item 2, update and discussion regarding schools reopening for the 2020-2021 school year.
All right, thank you. And here we are tonight with presentation number 5 for our schools reopening planning. And so Julia and I are back with you this evening to provide an update as to where we've been, where we are now, and where we will be going. And we'll begin every one of our board meetings until we do return to our full return, otherwise known as pre-COVID type of a school setting. We'll just be providing updates at every board meeting. So thank you so much for being here with us tonight. Of course, if you want to ask questions as we go or wait until we get to the end, whatever's your preference as we go through. All right, Julia, I think you start off number 1, slide 1.
All right, thanks, Marcy. So every year we begin our year with Professional Development Day for our certificated staff, and this year was much the same, albeit through social distancing and the virtual reality that we are all in now. And so we actually decided to break our Professional Development Day into 2 days and do half days so that we could avoid Zoom fatigue. And the first of the days had 2 parts. Teachers attended a session on trauma-informed practices and a session on some equity work, keeping in mind, and it was very much purposeful, that we wanted to begin our year focused on those social emotional learning aspects of our children. And we are super fortunate to have Autumn Arby, a social worker at White Hill in our district, and she did a beautiful job of leading us all through a training on trauma-informed practices. And I pulled from some of her slides here, but we talked about what trauma is, and that right now many of our families and many of our students are experiencing trauma in our pandemic situation that we're in, not to mention everything else that's going on. And the kinds of things, the impacts that trauma can have on a student's ability to learn, to focus, to self-regulate. She was also talking about ACEs, or adverse childhood experiences, that again have that impact of kind of stopping the learning and putting our kids, or putting any of us, frankly, into that fight, flight, or freeze mode. I had a connection, and when I spoke later with administrators, we all kind of had the same connection to the reading we'd done the previous year, Zaretta Hammond's book on culturally relevant teaching in the brain, where she talks about the amygdala hijack, and how when we find ourselves in that fight, flight, freeze response mode, learning stops, and it stops for a period of time. And so she then talked about what we can do to support our kids as they're having these experiences. And kind of the good news is that the number 1 protective factor for children who are experiencing trauma is to have a stable and supportive adult in their life. And our teachers and our principals and all of our employees that work in Ross Valley can play a part in this. And so for educators, being trauma informed means really understanding what trauma is and being sensitive to our students so that re-traumatization does not happen. And she also talked a lot about the components of a trauma-informed school, the need for safety and trust and peer support and empowerment, and cultural sensitivity. So it was a really worthwhile session for all of us. And I think it was also greatly appreciated that Autumn talked about the importance of recognizing as educators the time that we're in and the stress that we're in, and that need, of course, to really take care of yourself so that you can take care of others. So a good reminder to all of us. And then,
before you go to that next slide, let me just say we forgot a letter in Autumn's last name. It's Arbery, A-R-V-R-E-E.
My bad.
So just want to make an acknowledgement of that. I don't know how many times we looked at this and didn't catch it, but so sorry. Autumn Arbery, social worker, Whiteman.
Thank you for that, Marcy. Sure. And then the second portion of that day, Epic Education was back with us again. And this time we were working with two new trainers, Dr. Erica Brown and Janicia Rowland, and they were fabulous. And the focus of their talk was really on compassionate dialogue. And we really wanted to take an opportunity to practice and revisit the RIR protocol, the Recognize, Interrupt, and Respond protocol. So talking about the need for compassionate dialogue, particularly right now. And again, the conversation that we've all been having about counter storytelling. And they pointed out that there's a narrative that often goes untold, but is necessary to understand the experiences of people and students of color, and to change the normalized dialogues that perpetuate racial stereotypes. So really just diving into the conversation that we've been having. And then again, working with the RIR protocol, what we actually did was we pulled some of the student voices that are coming through the BIPOC of Marin Instagram site and used those to practice the protocol. So really a great way to start the year and a great way to ground us in our equity work that is so important for all of us. And then on the second day, on Friday, the 14th, we had a whole plethora of sessions that teachers could choose from depending on what their need was. And I think we mentioned before, we're very, very excited that we have actually 8 virtual learning coaches. This is a brand new leadership position within the Ross Valley District, particularly designed for the world that we're living in this year. And these are teachers who are absolutely passionate about virtual learning and how to really work towards replicating the richness of the in-person classroom experience. And so all of these sessions that you see listed here were run by our teacher virtual learning coaches. Some of them starting at the very beginning, introducing our TK through 2nd grade teachers to a new learning platform called Seesaw. Our middle school science teachers got to dabble in a new science program. Our middle school math teachers learning about Imagine Learning, which is a new math program for them. And then for anyone who wanted to, really taking a deeper dive into Google Classroom and learning more of the intricacies and abilities within that program. We had a couple of teachers focused on best practices with video conferencing, and dealing with breakout rooms and waiting rooms and polls and all of those good things that are embedded within Zoom and Google Meet. And then really talking about how to make synchronous learning more engaging for our students. So it was a great day, and Sean played a huge role in this. He ran a session for everyone on Clever and Parent Square, which are 2 fabulous tools that we are still learning how to use. And we're launched, and I think that it's been good. But it's also a reminder that it's kind of a massive undertaking, and we're still all learning together, and we're all learning to practice patience with each other and with ourselves, and allow ourselves to have a growth mindset and kind of lean into this world that we're living in. You know, none of us ever really expected to find ourselves in this virtual format. And I'm super, super proud of our teachers and the work that they're doing to make learning engaging and alive for our students. And a few of them are. Many of our teachers are teaching from their classrooms and are setting up these wonderful learning areas, and there's, you know, the teacher with the puppet and all of these different things that are going on. It's really it's kind of a crazy feeling when you walk through campus, because from the outside, it feels a little bit like a ghost town. You know, you're not hearing student voices, but then when you dip your head in a little bit, you see some really wonderful things that are happening. So huge team effort, amazing job on the part of our teachers and our principals who are doing, turning cartwheels to support their teachers and making sure that their students are engaged and off to a good solid start. And I believe we're back to you, Marcy.
All right. So here again, as we've previously presented, we've determined these 5 phases of return. So starting out in phase 1, which is where we are right now, started on August 19th in our Virtual Learning Academy, otherwise lovingly known as Distance Learning 2.0. We certainly had a lot of learnings from last spring, as well as some new state requirements that must be implemented when implementing distance learning. And as Julia previously stated, do want to thank all of our teachers, our administrators, classified employees, everybody who has gotten this school year launched and ready to go for all of our students and families, providing support for each other, as well as our students and families, to ensure that we are able to launch into this virtual learning academy and be able to provide the best possible education we can. None of us, as Julia mentioned, ever thought we'd be in this place, and yet here we are at the beginning of a new school year. Not only are we in a distance learning model, we also believe there's nothing like in-person learning, and nothing substitutes for that. But in this case, where none of the schools in California were able to open an in-person learning to start the school year, we're doing the very best we can. And we know that there's a need for acclimating and getting set into this mode. And one of the main elements to start the year is to establish that sense of community and to make sure that all the kids learn how to use their systems. The teachers are still practicing with them, and also needing to provide support for teachers, students, and families as they embark. So right now, we know that we need to focus on this new type of learning to start the school year, and one in which we know that we may need to return to once we go into our in-person model. There may be a time and a need to enter back into a full virtual learning academy, but we also know that that with any of our phases, we'll continue to have distance learning for quite some time. So now more than ever, our kids need our love, our patience, and our optimism as we embark on this new school year. And we also never thought that we'd start a school year in which we have fires. I'm looking out my office window right now, and it's very hazy out there. I think we all thought that we'd be preparing to start the school year in distance learning, and we would have some time before we experience the fires that we would anticipate coming later in the fall. But yet here we are. So this just underlies or helps us to realize more than ever that we need to make sure that our systems are strongly in place. A few of our towns, a couple of Friday evenings ago, did experience power outages. Some of our towns just Monday of this week, I think it was. And then we also had the state system talking about needing to shut power off. We do know that if we go into a power shutoff or where we have a lack of electricity, that also will impact our ability to do our distance learning model, because we'll be without internet, which is needed to run that program. So we are looking to make sure that we get solidly into our distance learning model and ensure that we have as many bugs worked out as possible and to provide that support. And at the same time that we're moving into the learning for all of the students, then we will need to also focus on, at the same time, the social emotional, the counseling needs, and those kinds of issues. Once we're able to move into phase 2 on down, we'll cover some of these later on in this presentation, so I'll stop there for now. But these are our 5 phases, from virtual learning to phase 2, having some in-person support, phase 3, having our hybrid model, which will include in-person and virtual learning with an A and B cohort, in addition to our cohort that will remain in distance learning all year long, or as long as the families decide to do that. And then we know that we would like to phase in, and we hope that some point in the year we'll be able to do an in-person with modified day for all students, other than those who might be remaining on distance learning for the year. And then maybe, just maybe, in the 2020-21 school year, we could be back to our pre-COVID or full return days. And of course, as we do enter that, we'll have a whole lot more instructional strategies and technologies to implement in the classroom as well. So where we are now, Julia, if you can go to the next slide, is what we currently have on our plates. It certainly is always a big endeavor when we're starting a school year to get the school year up and running. But it's a lot more complicated when you're building the ship while it's setting sail. And so we have some of the normal typical aspects of what we do in a opening of a school year, like Julia talked about, the staff development days, those kinds of things. Also teachers getting their classrooms ready, up and running. We have our back to school packets. There's new students are coming all the time. We're processing transfer requests as we're able to now have a better idea of our enrollment. And we know that we need to provide the training and support as staff. We have our new learning platforms that need to be taught, learned, and supported. And then with our tech and lunch distribution, right now, our technology distribution for families who need access to Chromebooks and or iPads at the younger grades, as well as our lunch distribution, are going on at our district office. They're not happening at the school sites right now. One of the unanticipated elements of launching this school year were the number of leave requests and staffing considerations that needed to go into place. Typically, staff members know well in advance of a school year if they need to request for leaves of absence for various reasons. Due to COVID-19, of course, there are many different reasons for leave requests, and we did have some that required us to fill positions right up until the 18th, the day before school started. HR was filling the very last positions. And in one case, the person still hasn't been able to start in their position. And so we have a substitute setting going on there. We also know that in distance learning, to develop and train a substitute pool is quite a different endeavor than just utilizing the countywide sub pool for in-person learning. It's very different now, where we can't just where we could give a sub a key to get into a classroom and the teacher could leave sub plans. It's quite different now. We can't give the subs the keys to the teacher's classroom. In other words, their login and passwords. So we're looking to develop and train the substitutes. They need to also, as our teachers, were trained on the various platforms that we're utilizing in the district. And so HR is busy working on that aspect. And in the meantime, of course, if a teacher does need to be out for a medical appointment or whatever they might have going on, then there's a system in place to cover their class. We also have launched our parent support via our new page on our website, our continuity of learning page. And with that, we launched that, and we're going to be continuing to add to it. The most latest addition was the aspect that Julia has created for our virtual learning information and support for parents. We also, back to school packets have taken a little bit of a different look this year as we are putting together and are getting ready to distribute our home learning kits. And as we talked about that in a previous meeting, those are individual student kits that items have been purchased, because we do know that when we come back into in-person learning, we have to minimize the amount of sharing that students have. So the home learning kits will support the students while they're doing the distance learning or virtual learning academy, as well as their in-person learning when they return to school. And we know that we need to support special ed with their distance learning plans. We have to consider the English language learner initial assessments. Those must be done in person. They cannot be done virtually. Our sites are putting together their counseling and intervention teams. And we are working on the LCAP. That, as we have known in other situations, has been called the LCAP. The state suspended the LCAP, which was supposed to be initially, the deadline was going to be in December of 2020, and they have postponed that requirement, but they put in place the LCAP, which is a shortened version related to how we are opening our school year and spending the dollars that are coming into the district toward our distance learning and whatever our educational environment is. And that has a deadline of September 30th. In accordance with those requirements for the LCAP, we also need to have a hearing. And so staff is busily putting together the elements that are required for the LCAP. We will be having a superintendent's council meeting next week, next Thursday, in which we will be able to share the draft LCAP with our parent groups that have been part of superintendent's council, and to get their feedback and input to the LCAP. We also have put in place our staff health and safety protocols. So as Julia mentioned under one of her slides, where many of the teachers are working directly from campus, we also have all of our classified employees working at their site of workplace location. And so our staff health and safety protocols have been put in place, and there needed to be training around those. We had this part twice, so I won't cover that again. We're also in the process of onboarding our new directors, new Director of Student Services, Eric Sable, Director of Human Resources, Esther Salinas. And then as we have later on our agenda tonight, we will be onboarding a new Chief Business Official. All of those energies and efforts to help them get acclimated, not only into their position in the district, but in some of the new aspects of even whatever experience Esther and Eric and our new CBO, hopefully if he's approved this evening, will come to our district with. Things are different and new. And so there needs to be that cross training and that onboarding that goes on. And we also have negotiations for distance learning. So we did settle with our teachers union, and we have a tentative agreement, which is also later on tonight's agenda on the consent agenda for that tentative agreement related to our distance learning negotiations. So we have embarked on that, and now we're implementing the elements that we've agreed to for distance learning. We don't have a settlement yet with CSEA or an MOU, Memorandum of Understanding. We're in process of getting ready to set and meet, hopefully later this week, if not early next week, so we can finalize that. And then as we saw in our first agenda item tonight, we have the Ross Valley Charter Renewal Proposal. And so that is going to require not necessarily the site administrators' participation in that, but all of us here at the district office will be going through that renewal proposal process. And then, of course, as I've mentioned at the top, with the smoke and fires and possible power outages and needing to deal with that. As we know, part of what we've been planning for, and it's probably a good thing that we're not right now in in-person school, because much of our planning had to do with maximizing heating, ventilation, opening windows and doors, our outside learning environments, and those would be very difficult to implement right now in this smoke environment. And of course, not to minimize that, because there are many people have been impacted and affected by the fires. And so really just want to give a moment to acknowledge the devastation. And I think, as we've seen in the news, this is the worst fire event that we've had in the state of California. So just acknowledge it's a very difficult time. On top of the COVID pandemic, now we have the fire season has begun. Okay, so the next slide is where we are going into would be phases 2 and 3, and how do we get there? As we talked about in previous presentations, as well as what we all know from our Virtual Learning Academy schedule, is that we are implementing the minimum instructional minutes as allowed by the state for our scheduling. And we have developed, of course, a Virtual Learning Academy schedule. And we need to continue to look at all the data that's coming our way and implementation of moving into phases 2 and 3. So looking at phase 2, which is allowable even while schools are under the virtual learning or not able to have in-person learning, is to provide some in-person support for our most vulnerable students. We can have students come onto the school site to receive any of the services that they may need, such as special education assessment and any of the English language learner assessments that may need to go on. We are currently working in being able to implement those settings for the children who fall into those categories. We know that when we talk about most vulnerable students, I don't mean to underestimate or undervalue the fact that every single one of our students is vulnerable at this time. Many of us as adults are vulnerable too in more ways than one. And as Julia shared in her slide of our back to school professional development day, those ACEs, the childhood traumatic events that occur, is one of the reasons that we made sure that we did train our teachers to be aware of and to be able to identify when a child might be not engaged or not coming to class, as we would call it, in a way that they might normally otherwise. And we also know that from the studies and from what other countries and states have experienced is that in part of that most vulnerable is our youngest of learners, our students who have not yet learned how to read, not yet learned how to sound out words and sentences, letters. They're beginning their math skills. So we know that our younger grades are also some of our most vulnerable, in addition to, of course, our special education, our English language learners, our students who may have technology difficulties at home, whether it's due to internet, which we are connecting, and Sean is with those families who might need internet support, as well as being able to issue and check out Chromebooks and or iPads for any families who need those for their learners. And so all of our kids are going through a very vulnerable time. We know that. What we do know in terms of the model that we're looking at, that we've identified for our hybrid model in looking at what you'll see later on tonight's presentation, but from our previous presentations, the VAB, or the virtual learning on Mondays, and then the cohorts of A and B for Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, Friday. Of course, we do have a cohort C, which is our kids who will remain in distance learning for the entire year. And the review of the data, the research that we've done, of course, we're following all of the county and state guidelines, the CDC recommendations, the county and the state public health recommendations, the California Department of Education recommendations and guidelines. And one of the studies that we saw actually talked about an AM PM model versus an AABB or A day B day type of a model. And it actually ranked that the AB day model is a safer model for bringing students back. And because of the need to clean in between the settings, if you have an AM PM, then that model would require that from the time that the A group leaves from their day to the B group coming, you would have to have cleaning, and that would need to be done in order to get both groups in a reasonable amount of time during the day, and to not extend a teacher's workday or to add time to our classified employees. That all would need to be occurring within an hour of time. And the products that we're using are disinfectants, and they do need to be followed in terms of ensuring that they will work in accordance with the manufacturer's guidelines and in accordance with what we are knowing from the state regarding what type of cleaning we need to have. So we've landed on the A-B model, and we also believe that in working for families, to have a family choose or be selected for the AM or the PM could be a hardship on families. And so the model that we've come up with, and Julia will talk about this later, actually does benefit all of our kids who will be returning to in-person, as well as those who will be remaining in our distance learning or virtual learning academy, mostly because the kids will not have to change teachers. I've seen communications from other school districts that when they do switch from the distance learning model that they have to their in-person model, they will have to redo all of their class placements. And that was one of the elements that we looked at very carefully and considered is how do we know that this time is very difficult for our students and for our staff, that once they have developed their classroom community, that to have to change teachers would cause that transition all over again. So this model that we've landed on does help us to ensure as much continuity for the students. And so will also allow us to pivot back and forth as needed if we do need to return for whatever reason into a full distance learning once we have started. So that's where we are right now as we're looking to get into phases 2 and 3. And so Julie, if you can go on to the next slide. And so in terms of getting ready for these phases, the PPE has been received by the district there and now has been distributed to each of the school sites. We're in the process of marking the campuses for our 6 feet distancing as well as the flow. We know that by the county guidelines that we're following, those were revised, by the way, as of August 12th, just last Wednesday, or no, 2 Wednesdays ago. And so there were a couple of changes that were made in the review of those county guidelines that we are re-looking at what the planning that we did throughout the summer with our operations and team and looking to make some enhancements and changes. So the markings are occurring, and we also will continue to now finalize our health and safety protocols for staff and students. We are working on a handbook that we're almost ready to finalize. There was a thought that the County Nurses Association would be taking this on, and since we also, our district has a district nurse, that she participates in that, and we thought for a minute that that might be coming from that entity, but when it didn't look to be getting developed there, we researched other districts and are creating our own, so that we will also know that we'll finalize as we understand the nurses, the county-wide nurses group will be taking a look at and coming up with a handbook per se, or for students and staff. And so we're looking at whatever changes we need to make once ours is finalized, which is just in the very review stages right now of being final. Each of the school sites needs to develop a school site specific safety plan. That is required for whatever point we return to in-person learning. It's not specific to just the TK through 6th waiver, but it is required at whatever point we reopen. So the school sites are working on those. There are many elements that are common and significant or common between sites. And so each of the principals who is leading that for their sites is not working in a vacuum necessarily. They do have the support, but there are certainly elements that are site specific only. So those have to be worked out. As I mentioned a little while ago, our outdoor learning environments, we're getting ready for those. So we do have them, or each of the school sites has them identified. And we also know that with our outdoor learning environments that we've talked about in previous board presentations, is that those aren't elements that are going to be replacing an in-person or a classroom setting, that they will be utilized throughout the day, but there isn't a way to take all of the technology, all of the seating, all of the whiteboards, and to put those outside. So that any amount of the outdoor learning environments that are utilized will be adapting the classroom lesson plans to work in the outdoor environment. We also know that we're going to have a shift from our tech and lunch distribution that will occur from the school sites. So once we are ready to move to our site in-person instruction of any kind, we will have those in place. And so we also know that we'll be training our teachers because they will simultaneously be doing in-person and virtual instruction. There will need to be a period of time that they adjust, our students and families adjust to that too. And so working on ensuring that our teachers will be ready for both kinds of models, as they each will have that under our hybrid model that we've created. We also are in process, as I mentioned, with CSEA for negotiations. We still do need to negotiate with RVTA for the in-person learning model. And that part is we're working on dates right now so that we, our two groups, the district and RVTA, can come back together. We also know what's going to be very difficult is employee leave replacements. So as I mentioned, we did have a number of teachers and classified employees who have needed different kinds of leaves for whatever reason, be related to COVID-19 or any of the other statutory leaves that are available to them, and or any of the negotiated leaves that are within our collective bargaining agreements. We do know that when we do return to in-person, we will have a number of employees who will not be able to be in the in-person learning environment. And so that will start that process all over again of being able to recruit and hire to fill those positions. So our human resources department needs time to be sure that we have staffing filled. We know that we want students back on campus. Everyone would love to be able to return to in-person learning, but we of course can't do that if we don't have staffing. And so we need to ensure, and it takes time from the time that we post our in-house and outside advertisements, go through the interview processes, all of the aspects of our selection processes, and be able to onboard and have people actually begin, because every person who becomes an employee of the school district must be fingerprinted and must be TB'd. So for fingerprints, it's with every single employer. So even if somebody, let's say, had just previously been employed in another school district near us, let's use San Rafael, they would have to be re-fingerprinted before they could start in our school district. And that's a requirement that we have to follow. If we have teachers who, let's say, we do know that we're in a teacher shortage, and we may be hiring teachers who don't yet have full credentialing credentials, and they're in the process of getting those, that we would need to go into those processes. We've just adjusted our HVAC systems to be able to be at full exterior air use, as well as changing the filters. And because of the fires, of course, our maintenance and operations system is returning those to the best setting for in classroom or in building recycling systems. And so those will have to be then transitioned back if we're able. And we've already covered fires. We know that in order to be able to return, if it's not part or because the county is off the state's watch list, we will have to consult with teachers, staff, and community. So we're preparing to get ready to do that. And then as Julia will talk about, we've developed a hybrid schedule, but it is very much in the development phase. It has not been fully fleshed out. So we'll continue developing the hybrid schedule. And then, as I mentioned before, the assessment of special ed. So we'll be reorganizing or restarting our operations and teaching and learning work as we move into these next phases. And of course, the whole time, as I mentioned, we're reviewing all the guidelines and everything that's coming out from our state. And then we've had a number of parents, and we're so appreciative, who've asked how they might be able to help. Once we do return to in-person school, the amount of visitors on campus needs to be limited. So our volunteer usage will be limited, but the school sites are already using some parent volunteers. We know that we will be looking to also incorporate some fundraising. So we'll be reaching out. Those might occur at the site level, as well as, and we'll be talking next week at Superintendent's Council about some of those elements too, for that continued parent support. So what we're looking at is the timing of return to in-person instruction. So we either have two ways. One is that we need to be off the state's watch list, and we've included the link there that takes us to the state's website related to the elements that a county needs to have or to be in good standing in order to get off the watch list. And once our county, and the good news is we're going definitely in the right direction of getting off of the state's watch list. When I looked yesterday, I think it was yesterday, we were 4 out of the 5 we had met. And then today when I checked, we now are at 3 of 5 required elements to get off of the state's watch list. So, but we are continuing to move in the right direction, especially in terms of the positivity rates in Marin. So that's one way in which all of our students, TK, actually our preschool students as well, our preschool special day class students on up through 8th grade will be able to return or begin in-person instruction. The other way is through the waiver application. We've covered this in a previous board meeting, and that is we're only able to do that for TK through 6th grades. The state or the county, did issue its application process and guidelines on August 14th. So we reviewed what's required. And as I mentioned in the previous slide, we're definitely working on the elements. We have to be able to explain in this waiver application process how we are implementing all 30 of the county guidelines. And that is also needed for each of the school sites, site-specific plan. To date in the county, there have been 16 submissions for the waiver application. And of those 16, 3 of them are public schools. It's Laguna Elementary and Lincoln Elementary. Those, if anybody's familiar, are out in rural West Marin, and they have very low numbers in their schools. And then, of course, Bayside Martin Luther King, which is in the Marin City, Sausalito. So only 3 public schools. The remainder of those who've applied as of the latest submission was as of August 21st, were 13 private schools. So we, as I mentioned at the last board meeting, really have been focused on our distance learning model. That's how we needed to start the year. All the elements that we needed to be able to get up and running is what we needed to do to make sure we were ready for that. And as we do know, even when we go into in-person instruction, we will need to continue some level of distance learning just as part of that model. And so one of the stages that we'll need to also look at, and this is recommended by the CDC, is to consider the COVID-19 transmission rates in the immediate community and in the communities in which our students, teachers, and staff live. We know that over half of our employees in Ross Valley do not reside in the towns of San Anselmo and Fairfax. Those specific communities where people reside is not what the county looks at in terms of the transmission rates and what the state looks at. They don't get into that granular level, but it is something that as a school district we do need to consider, given that we have various of our members of our school community coming from outside of our immediate Marin County or San Anselmo and Fairfax. We need to coordinate with public health on a plan to perform COVID-19 testing. The good news is the county has confirmed that they have, now it's probably been about 3 weeks in place, utilizing a system that has a really quick turnaround, and the availability of testing seems to be really strong. We also need to ensure the stability of testing, reporting, monitoring process. So although there are elements that we cannot require students or staff to be tested, we do hope for the health and safety of all that people will take advantage of testing and reporting. It is not a requirement by our county or by the state that employees must be tested prior to reporting to work. We know that we need transition time from the time that either we're off the state's watch list or that we have an approved waiver application for TK through 6, that we will need to transition into our in-person learning model, because we need to, in that preparation, be able to teach, learn, and practice the new health and safety protocols. This most likely will also include in some cases for sites, depending on the number of ingress and egress points that they have, or entrances to and from the school campus, needing to get the flow and needing to get the way that some families, based on wanting to maintain the cohorts, is that they'll be able to go in through what entrance and leave through what entrance of the school site. And then, of course, we want to minimize any major disruptions between moving from the hybrid or virtual learning academy into our hybrid model. And so we also know that we have to be ready for any other outliers or unanticipated issues or situations that could come our way. We don't know what Mother Nature is going to bring us. We certainly hope there aren't any more situations like we're in, but there could be other elements that we have to face. And so we need to be ready to either halt, stall, or just continue on in the process of returning to in-person instruction or beginning in person. So when I backwards map, on the next slide, Julia, when I backwards map being ready to have all of the elements related to the site-specific plans, our handbooks, the trainings, the markings of the schools, the transition that the teachers will need to get in place, and also looking at if we do go for the waiver, that we had to have had those consultative sessions with labor, our employees, with our parent group, as well as with the community agencies that serve our students in Ross Valley School District, that in order to plan for those and have them, and when I backwards map it, it looks like the soonest that we'd be able to apply for the waiver would be September 14th. And that's given that all of the elements, like the consultative elements and everybody who needs to be consulted, do move forward with that. So that's in addition to any of the elements that we need. So we also know that the waiver process itself takes 14 days before we would hear back, or up to 14 days to receive information back from our county health department through that, because they have to, once they receive it, the county health department has to review it and also get approval from the state health department, and then they have to be able to get back to us. So we would need to plan and prepare to move into the in-person. So what we're recommending is that we look right now at kind of putting a information out and helping to everybody to be able to kind of settle around, but settle into the distance learning, our virtual learning academy, and get the bugs and the wrinkles and get everybody acclimated into that, and then be able to transition. So if we look at putting this date out there, that then I think that helps to give the employees as well as our parent community an ability to just kind of relax and settle in. And we also know that in terms of the process that we have to go through, our HR department in particular has to go through with regards to any accommodations that might need to be provided to employees. Those take a while to go through. So looking at everything that we need to do, not just around going from our instructional models, but everything else that we need to do as a district and that we have going on our plate, and we covered a lot of that under what's on our plates now, that this seems like a realistic timeline. Of course, if we're not off the state's watch list, or for some reason we're not eligible, we're not approved for a waiver, then we may be coming back and looking at a later start date for in-person instruction. As I mentioned at our previous board meeting, looking to, in the phasing in or the elements related to if we do go for the waiver, is prioritizing our most vulnerable students. And so those would be, as I mentioned before, our special education, our English language learners, our students who need intervention, and then also prioritizing a phased in return of our youngest learners. So starting with TK on up through second grade, and then phasing in third and fourth, and on up into fifth and sixth, fifth and sixth. And then of course, without the state or county coming off the watch list, our seventh and eighth graders will have to remain in our distance learning model until we come off that list. So looking at everything that we need to do, this is what we are looking to recommend in terms of our soonest return to in-person learning, in order to get everything done and ready for that. All right, and so Julia, back to you.
All right. So once we are finally back in in-person learning, as Marcy has talked about this evening, we would be in a hybrid model. And our classes, the current classes that we have would be divided into cohorts, with cohort A and cohort B being students who have elected to return to in-person learning, and then cohort C remaining in virtual learning. It is important that our families recognize that the day will not be a full day. It will be a shortened day for a couple of reasons. One is that the logistics of providing lunch in our current COVID environment are pretty tricky. But probably more importantly, we want to make sure that all of our students are having live contact with their teacher on a daily basis. And so as you can imagine, it's going to be a challenge for our teachers to be simultaneously working with students who are right in front of them in their classroom, and so happy to be back there, and to have, you know, the ability to kind of have that spark that can only come with in-person instruction, while at the same time needing to make sure that our students who are home in virtual learning mode are receiving support. So there will be some live instruction for our distance learners during that day. That shortened day allows for time in the afternoon for our teachers to work kind of through office hour type situation with our home learners. And I think that is it. Did you want to add anything to that, Marcy?
I think when we did also the analysis of when we were working through the different models that we were looking at, AM, PM, or the hybrid, we also took into consideration the amount of transitions that would need to go on, and feeling that there will be a certain amount of transition when kids arrive in the day. And with an AM, PM model, the length of the in-person time would be probably so short that we wanted to maximize the amount of instructional time that is provided to students. And so that's one of the elements that we looked at and considered, and why we landed on the AB model, is to maximize the amount of instructional time that students would have in the in-person environment. So that's just something I wanted to add.
Absolutely, yeah. Our 4th through 8th grade students have a minimum instructional day of 240 minutes, which is 4 hours, but you really can't fit 2 4-hour school days into a day. So those are going to be even more shortened, and it could be, I don't know, I think other districts who are running an AM PM day, I've seen 2.5-hour segments. So we've also had some current concerns about transportation for such a short period of time, a little bit more difficult, and parents have explicitly stated their need to return to work and have full days of daycare. The other thing is that if you have a shortened day, there's more of a possibility of providing daycare in the afternoon, whereas in AM PM, we're using all of the classrooms all day long, and so providing on-site daycare becomes more difficult.
And thank you for mentioning the daycare, Julia. That is another element that we considered. So as we have noted, that the YMCA currently is running just out of one of the campuses, and the number of participation, they actually accessed an additional classroom there. We know that once we go into our in-person model, the YMCA will be returning to each of the sites and running out of those sites. But based on the amount of space that we would have at each of the sites, if there's an increased amount of participation, then we would need to look to be able to provide the YMCA alternative space, which we're working on with them right now. And also, as I sent out last night to all of our parent community, but for those of the board who may not know, is that the county has developed a learning hub type of a model, which has, like the YMCA in our district, has a free reduced level related to it. And so they wanted us to put out a survey for people who might still need daycare, but they have secured a learning hub model that also allows more free and reduced participation than the Y. So hopefully families are completing that survey, and we'll be learning more about that as time comes.
All right.
All right, so questions. Trustees, any questions?
Wow, that is so much stuff, Marcy.
Very thorough. Thank you all so much for all that work and thinking with all those plates spinning in the air.
So many plates.
You could just predict the future. That'd be a lot easier.
We wish.
Yes.
That would certainly make our work a lot easier too. Like one of the things that we were working on a lot during the summer was when the state guideline suggested that there be passive or active checks when students return to in-person, and now that guideline has changed. So there have been elements, and as we know, the guidelines are shifting. We just received notice today of an updated, I haven't even had a chance to read it, but an updated CD coming out from the CDE around another opportunity for cohorts and elements like that. So I need to now dig into that and learn more about that.
Marcy, it's Mark. Is there another county that is close to or off the watch list that might give us a look-see that might actually implement in-person learning that we can look to see how that goes? Since the state obviously is in different places depending upon where each district is in each individual county, I'm curious about whether there are those locations that the education community will be looking to that may be starting up first to get a good sense about how effective any school district's plans may be to have a safe in-person experience.
Yes, we're reading articles, at least I am, every single day that are coming out through Cal Matters, as well as other educational entities, as well as elements from other countries. And what we're knowing and learning is that those that start out with a phased-in return and ensure that all of their systems are in place and that there is good amount of testing, tracking those protocols, that they have a better chance of not closing. We know that what's most disruptive is when we return to in-person, if we do have to close one of our classes, and there's a whole explanation around at what point do you look at closing a class or a school site or an entire district. So we're following those. Some of the counties in the state of California are not on the state's watch list. So they've been able to begin in their in-person learning model. They haven't necessarily, and there was one district in particular in Southern California, the Hills. They, by natural way, as this article explained, they naturally social distance because of the distance between each of the properties in that community. But they have started out, they're smaller school districts. They are able to maintain the physical distancing. On a webinar that I was on, that a doctor friend shared with me, that is with the American Association of Pediatrics and JAMA, which I don't really know what that acronym stands for, but with doctors from other countries stating that the most significant elements to any in-person learning is being able to maintain the distancing. The PPE or the face coverings are absolutely critical. We know that was a requirement that changed around the July 23rd, I believe, was originally all students, TK through 8th grade, would need to wear face coverings, and then the state has come in saying that students in TK through 2nd do not need them. But what the CDC is recommending, that although the state changed that school districts really should be looking at utilizing face coverings for all students, except those, of course, that are unable to utilize them, whether due to disability, age, whatever it might be, but that we do practice having everybody. And then, of course, our cleaning and hand washing protocols. So that is going to be a large part of the school day once we do return to in-person, is the hand washing schedules need to be in place. and also hand sanitization. So when students arrive at school, they need to wash their hands or sanitize, as well as before and after any of the recesses or the snack recess. And they're recommending, some school districts have implemented every hour the students take a break for hand washing. So there's a lot of elements that will be on top of getting back into the in-person instructional models.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Marcy, can you,
Colleagues, any more questions?
I was just hoping Marcy could remind us about the significance of October 5th.
The reason landed on October 5th is thinking that that would be the date by which we would be able to have everything in place, whether it's coming off the state's watch list or being able to be on an approved waiver. And so ensuring that we have everything that we need, and that date allowing us to, knowing that now that we would not have an in-person return, I think helps everybody kind of settle in. Not everybody's going to be happy with that decision or that determination, but at least everybody would now know what that first date of return would be, and that is the soonest that it would be is October 5th. Also, I did survey other districts in Marin, and one district in particular has looked at November 2nd as being their first date of return. Some of the other districts, in terms of their dates, as others have set also, October 5th. And three of those three districts have, we know that other districts have not yet identified a particular return date. Some, by the nature of the grade levels of their kids, they have to wait till they're off the state's watch list. And others are still considering whether or not they will be going for the waiver. Some districts have already determined they won't be, and at all. As I mentioned, 3 have submitted so far. Others have already determined they will not be, and others are still, like our district, considering the waiver, but are not yet ready to apply.
Thank you. I just wanted to really emphasize that and hope that that allows a little bit of just, for lack of a better word, calm, so that families and teachers can focus on the teaching and learning that's happening right now. And so I really appreciate there sort of being a place where we can all recalibrate and then look at it again in the same thorough and thoughtful way that you've been doing it. I really appreciate that. And I think that will support our both families as they need to make some planning, and staff as they do the work of teaching and helping our kids move through the online learning in our academy. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you. You're welcome. Thank you.
So Marcy, am I understanding correctly that it's our hope that we'll be able to apply for and receive the waiver for a top of October start, that it will not happen before then, that it may not happen then if the numbers start to go south or we don't receive the waiver for some reason, but that is our target and the earliest possible date we would reconvene for live instruction?
Yes, thank you for summarizing. That is true. Yes.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, any other questions?
No, except how very appreciative I am, and I know I'm not the only one, for the amount of work and the comprehensive and tireless research and conversation and checking, and just I feel so profoundly grateful that you are doing all of these things, even if it's a lot to listen to, because I just keep reminding myself I didn't have to do it all. So thank you all staff for this remarkable amount of work that you've engaged in.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Appreciate that. It's definitely a lot of work, and it's not looking to be patted on the back or anything like that, but just that acknowledgement of trying to rebuild this school system from the ground up. Is none of us, this wasn't a planned approach to how we open schools or operate our schools. So thank you for the acknowledgement. and definitely couldn't have done it alone. Any decision that we make about the reopening, about any of our protocols and systems, it is in communication and collaboration with all of the certificated and classified administrators, site and district office, as well as the input and the participation of all of our members of teaching and learning and our operations teams. And then just any other, we also are getting, have received parent input feedback through the opportunity for these board meetings, as well as our town hall, looking to have some more of those as well coming up. But it's just a lot to try to find the time to schedule one more meeting kind of a thing and prepare for that. So, but we are doing it, and we'll be plugging along and moving along. And the way that we are working is ensuring that in order to be able to provide the best possible learning environment, no stone gets left unturned, and all of our ducks are getting in a row. So thank you.
That's so awesome. And I also I know you thank them every day, but we don't get a chance to see anybody anymore. So if you are a teacher and you're listening, thank you. It's a remarkably odd thing, and we are profoundly aware that you are also human beings, and that you are teaching professionals, and that from a small sector of people, you may be getting some guff, and I apologize for that. But I believe that the huge preponderance of people deeply appreciate and see the work and the strangeness that your lives must be, and your ability to keep our kids in the forefront of your attention during a global pandemic is deeply appreciated. So thank you. And thank you to the preponderance of a majority of people who are appreciating our teachers as well. And if you're frustrated, that's awesome. Let us know. We can help you understand why this is so hard. But really, thank you so much to the community and the teachers and the staff and everyone for your patience. This is an unprecedented time.
Thank you, Anne, for acknowledging the staff because it's all of our employees who are doing the heavy lifting around ensuring that our students are supported. And so I want to acknowledge every single one of our employees who come to work every day. Whether
I know, and it must be so hard if you run an office at one of our schools. You see every kid and many parents every single day, and you know everything that's going on. And now they still go in there every single day and they see nobody, but they still have to know everything that's going on. If you clean the empty campus, thank you. And I know that it's much more fun when you can see the kids you're cleaning for. But I know that every single human being who works here is still doing their very, very best and then some. So anyway, I don't want to belabor the point, but thank you.
And I do want to give a shout out to all the parents and guardians, because they are also doing a majorly heavy lift in supporting their children in school, as well as maintaining everything that they need to do to put food on the table for their families and keep the roofs over their heads. And so this is not an easy time for any person right now. And so
Totally agree.
It's a collective effort to ensure the success of all of our children.
And a super good time for kindness and patience and being good to yourself and not freaking out.
Thank you.
This is
Thank
Brian.
you.
I second kindness and patience. Great work, guys.
Yes. You don't need a vote. You've received our non-voting approval of your extremely excellent plans, correct?
Yes, thank you. That's
okay. All righty, colleagues, unless anyone has anything else on that? No? Okay, moving on.